Hi, it's Sunday evening, October 19th, and I want to talk about gold. You know, this goes back kind of a long way. I don't know whether it serves me or it hurts me, but in any case, I have a long memory. And after 9/11, after the attacks on 9/11, I was immediately skeptical of the narrative that we were being told, and as a result, I met a fellow named Mike Rupert, who was one of the original whistleblowers about 9/11, and he gave a talk in November of 2001, which really blew the lid off of my world understanding. He explained the incredible depth of corruption that is embedded in the U.S. government. And so I followed him for quite a while. He ended up committing suicide actually in 2008, but he predicted collapse of the Western system at some point because he just saw it as untenable. But in any case, in 2003 or 2000, I think it was in 2003 or 2004. I'm not sure which year. He gave a presentation in my area, and he brought along this woman named Catherine Austin Fitts. Now, Catherine Austin Fitts was an investment banker, conservative Republican, working for a company called Dillon Reed, and she got a job working with the George H.W. Bush administration, I believe, and she uncovered $59 million of absconded, or what is it? What is the word? Embezzled money from the Department of Housing, Urban and Development. And for her honest efforts, her career was destroyed because you're not supposed to do that kind of thing. You're not supposed to uncover and much less expose, embezzlement. But in any case, so she and Mike Rupert gave this talk, and they were talking about gold. And at the end of the presentation, I went up to this woman, Catherine Austin Fitts. She's still around. She has I think a website called Solari, or something like that. And she speaks of things from a more conservative political point of view, but she's a truth teller. So I said, well, what do you think about gold? And because we had just been through the dot-com crash in 2000. And people were beginning to kind of wonder about the whole U.S. financial system even back then. So I asked her, what do you think about gold? And she said, well, I'm not a financial advisor, but yeah, I think it might not be a bad idea to buy gold. So I ended up buying a couple of gold coins or something, and they were going for $400 at that point. So which I thought was, and I kept them, but then I sold them. I don't know what happened. But in any case, I've kind of, watched the gold market for any number of years. And but what I've seen in the last like 2-3 years, gold has really taken off, and now it is absolutely going. As I've been using this term, ballistic. It's like, the chart was like, like that. It's just going vertical at this point. New highs every day. Multiple highs within a day, that sort of thing. So I thought I should address this point. And there's a number of issues here that I think are affecting this rise in gold price. The first thing, and I'm going to talk about them not in any particular order, but because I just listed them. So one of the main issues is that central banks are buying gold. One of the big controversies that has arisen is the idea of cryptocurrencies, and particularly Bitcoin. And Bitcoin was supposed to be the answer to the bankers' financial system, which has hurt a lot of people, and they people feel it's a method of vast control over the world. Essentially, the bankers. There's an expression: all wars are bankers' wars. And so the idea is that, especially from libertarians and people who are, think, look in libertarian type terms, that Bitcoin is kind of the answer to it. And I can understand that. But on the other hand, what I think is also equally important is to look what the quote unquote smart money does. And you have companies like El Salvador who are buying Bitcoin, and you have countries like Sikkim, I think it is, that owns Bitcoin. In Argentina, I think they want to make Bitcoin even the national currency, something like that. But what are the big boys doing? We're talking about China, Russia, some of the major countries. They're buying gold. They're buying lots of gold, and there's even been talk of like a gold-backed ruble. See, the United States actually had a gold-backed currency going, I guess, back in from 1933. President Roosevelt sort of, I don't know exactly what happened. He basically demanded people send their gold back to the government and their gold coins, because the U.S. dollar was on the verge of collapse at that point because of the Great Depression. But in any case, people could still own jewelry, I imagine. But the dollar was backed by gold for a number of decades. But in around 1970, it was during the Vietnam War. The U.S. was deficit spending, spending way more than it was taking in tax receipts, and as a result, there was pressure on the dollar. But the dollar was backed by gold. So at one point, Charles de Gaulle, the president of France, said to the United States, we don't really want your dollars anymore because they're losing value because you're printing so many of them that when you print something, there's more supply of it, then the value of it goes down. But gold is far more stable. So, Charles de Gaulle was actually, there was a number of assassination attempts presumably because of his defiance of U.S. hegemony. But anyway, at a certain point, President Nixon said that they were no longer going to pay out gold as a substitute for the dollar, and so they basically decoupled gold from the U.S. dollar. So the dollar is a what we call a fiat currency. It means money is just printed out of thin air. Now, what has happened though is that because the dollar has been viewed as hostile, you could say, to many countries, because when you're trading in the dollar system, if the U.S. government says we're going to impose sanctions on you, you can't trade in dollars, or they restrict the use of your dollars, or even take your money, as what happened with Russia. Russia had $300 billion U.S. dollars in foreign banks, and the U.S. government just says we're freezing them. You don't have access to it anymore. So people are thinking, well, maybe we need to do something about this. So you have currencies like the ruble and the Chinese yuan that with those governments buying massive amounts of gold, it appears that what they're trying to do is to basically create more gold-backed currencies, which further undermines the dollar. So that's one big aspect of what is going on. It turns out, though, that a big news is that China just set up a new trading platform in Shanghai and plans to have facilities to store gold in Hong Kong and Saudi Arabia, and I think and also in Shanghai. I think there's 3 places. So, but you see, in the past, when people bought gold, or let's say Venezuela, it had several $1 billion worth of gold, and it was storing it in vaults in England, and the British decided that we're just taking it. It's like this is the freedom and democracy crowd. Thinks that they can just steal anything they want. So as a result, people are and even in Germany. Germany had some doubts about keeping its gold in the United States vaults. I think the reason why they kept it there was because they were afraid the Russians were going to come in and steal their gold. just like the United States in Libya, they invaded Libya, and suddenly Libya's gold reserves vanished on a cargo plane. So people are thinking, well, maybe it's not such a good idea to store gold in U.S. banks. Maybe we should store them with Chinese banks. But the thing is, when you store it with a Chinese bank, it's off of the U.S. and Western trading system. So that undermines the Western control of the financial system, because there's some evidence for a long time. There's been evidence of gold price suppression. In other words, when gold was going up in value, the central banks would essentially sell. They would like short, what was called short sell. They would borrow gold and then sell it on the market to drive the price down. And in some cases, they were even doing what is called naked short selling, which means they didn't even own the gold. They were just putting in an order to sell gold that they didn't even have, and that drove the price down. So there was it was kind of like a rumor among in the gold bug community. There's a whole subculture of people who are called gold bugs, because they feel they're really infatuated with gold as the ultimate currency. Now, there's other issues. The fact that there's a lot of global instability. The fact that the United States is 30. Last I counted, it was $37 trillion in debt. The European Union countries are also very deep in debt. And so because of this kind of global instability and uncertainty, there's been a tendency towards buying gold. But as I mentioned earlier, this shift to gold really started decades ago. So, even though it was $400 back in 2003, it went up to $1,000 or more. It actually in the 1970s, it actually hit $800 an ounce. It went from $35 an ounce, which was the pegged price of gold under Franklin Delano Roosevelt, until Nixon unpegged that, and immediately the price within a very short time went up to from $35 to $800. But then I guess you could say the short sellers came in. It got, as they say, overbought. People bought so much, they were so excited by this rise that they bought into this rally. And then the manipulation of the bankers drove the price down, and it stayed down in the $300 to $400 range for a long time. But it has been gradually creeping up. So at this point, it was like in 2022, it was trading for about $1,600 an ounce, something like that. But it's now trading at over $4,000 an ounce. I think the last I saw was about $4,200 an ounce. And this has all happened just in the last 3 years, and especially it's really taken off in the last year. So I thought I should just bring this to people's attention, because what this looks like to me is it's symptomatic of the loss of control by the West of the international financial system. I think that there's a good possibility, and this is the main point, there's a good possibility that there has been price suppression of gold by the Western banks, and as they've lost control, as the major competitors, Russia, China, and India, and other countries have loaded up on gold, they've essentially lost the ability to suppress the price of gold, and so we're finding something what we would call price discovery, which means that when the market is unable to manipulate the price, it finds what the real market actually thinks it's worth. And as I say, it looks like it's about $4,200 right now, and there are predictions that it could go as high as $6,000 in the next couple of years. So just thought that would be, I wanted to just bring that to people's attention, because it does seem it's symptomatic of what is going on, and also I'm certainly not going to give any investment advice, especially now, because if I had given this talk, a year ago, people would have kind of, laughed at me. But in fact, I have family members who said, Eric, what do you think about buying gold? I said, yeah, you should definitely buy some gold. But even then, I was very conservative because I thought, well, you can't be sure, and I'm not, I don't like to present myself as an expert. But now at this point, I can say, well, I told you so, because gold really is going up in price, and it looks like it's going to continue to do so. So that's what I want to talk about in this particular video. There's a couple of other things I'm going to be discussing in other videos. But thanks again for listening. Please remember to support my channel if you can with a donation, or you can become a member of Substack, or you can buy me a coffee, or you can contribute to my PayPal, or you can buy a what I call my information billboard T-shirts, which are T-shirts that aren't, they're not promoting me personally. They're just promoting ideas that I like to put out there to get people to think, because that's my Substack channel is called Inquiry and Thinking, and the main point that I'm trying to make in my videos is that if you feel that you're under control, if there's things that are going on, then you just don't feel good about it. The way out of that is to ask questions, and when you hear something going on, you say, is that really true, and also whose interest does it serve? Just to kind of close out as a good example of this, we see these No Kings protests going on right now, and I just it's valid. I think I just saw a video. I think J.D. Vance put it out, where they show Donald Trump putting on a crown and a royal robe and taking a sword, as if Donald Trump is going to become the king of America. And I was like, haven't we been through this all? I think we fought a revolutionary war to get rid of kings, and we want this guy to come back as a king. I mean, give me a break. So, but when you inquire into it, it turns out that the No Kings movement is heavily influenced by the Democratic Party, and they talk about oligarchy and so on. It's kind of like a Bernie Sanders kind of movement, but they don't talk about the foreign relations aspect of it. They don't talk about the military-industrial complex aspect of it, from what I can tell. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's the impression that I get. So it looks to me like a kind of a way of keeping control over the Democratic base. But that's just an example. But, the further example, of course, is getting back to gold, is when you see the price of gold going up, you have to ask, what is actually going on here? And so the purpose of my presentation today is to give you some ideas of what I think is going on. So that's it for this presentation. Thank you again for listening, and I will see you in the next video.